conclusion of this year's European School online program, which we of course had to do during the lockdown. But I think we have achieved quite a lot. There's been more than 100 lectures this year and more than 5,000 participants. But Erica will be explaining about all that when she speaks on Sunday afternoon at our usual time of 5 o'clock. Just to remind you of a couple of things, if you go on the website, there are a number of online courses which we're running, and you can check out the details there. And you can also check out a fantastic new document, the newsletter, which is actually, I think, quite a work of art in what it is. And great praise should be given to Iphigenia and Eric and all those other people who have contributed to it.
No, I posted it.
And as always, we say at this point that we're very pleased that we're able to offer these online talks free. But of course, if anybody would like to make a donation, that can again be done on the website. So we're very lucky and privileged to welcome Juliet Bates this afternoon. She's going to be talking about the wisdom teachings in plain view, inspiration around us. Now, Juliet was born in England and she's lived in Australia, Abu Dhabi, Singapore, and is now based in Milan. Her study of the ancient wisdom teachings began at an early age, expanded by the study of theosophical texts, as well as esotericism and the Kabbalah. She holds a degree in psychology and was a member of the British Psychological Society for 20 years, and is also a teacher and a translator. She's translated fundamental theosophical texts, given talks, and taught courses on the wisdom teachings and esotericism for many years. She's also a Reiki master teacher, teaching healing, meditation, and the importance of positive thought and universal unity. She's a TS member of the Colwyn Bay Lodge in Wales, which is a long way from Milan, and also in London. And she's also currently the European School's managing editor of publications and co-director of online courses. So welcome to everybody. Welcome to you, Juliet, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Tim, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. Let me see if I can share my screen and do it properly. It's the bottom.
Yes, while you are doing that, Juliet, welcome. I will mute everyone.
Okay.
And then I will ask to, you can unmute yourself, Juliet, please. I can unmute you. I will unmute you. All right.
Unmute, Bruce. Unmute. I am now.
Unmute. And then we can see your screen. You are ready to go?
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Everything fine.
Brilliant. I'm worse than Tim at computers. Thank you very much. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about the wisdom teachings in plain view and the inspiration that we find in our daily lives and might overlook. These have been a couple of weeks where we've been asking for recipes, and I think that my talk has various ingredients running through it, which might not make sense as you see them individually, but they will all come together in, I hope, a perfect dish at the end of my talk. The overview, hang on a minute, I've got to click on this one. Okay. So first of all, what is inspiration? Then I would like to present the evolution of inspiration, which is something I don't think you'll find on the internet because it's something that I have come up with in one of my studies. Then I'll talk briefly about Blavatsky and Farthing and the Deity and Cosmos and Man course, something called inattentional bias, and then move on to the fun part of teachings in inspiration around us and my personal inspiration. So let's have a look at the etymology of inspiration. As we can see, from the late Latin to French to English and Greek, inspire was understood as the sense of inhaling, of to breathe, to blow into, to excite and to inflame, as in the immediate influence of God or a god. In early figurative meanings, they were religious in context and therefore often connected to spirit. In Middle English, circa 1300, it denoted divine guidance and to breathe or put life and spirit into the human body, to impart reason perhaps to the human soul. And this is what I would understand as levels of inspiration of level 1. And we see an example of this in Genesis, as with any other of the major scriptures. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. In Genesis chapter 2:7, the Hebrew word used for the creation of the first human being is formed, which is yiser, and it describes the actions of an artist or a sculptor. This term always refers specifically to work done on some existing substance. In this case, it is describing God forming human life from the ground itself. And the Hebrew word apar refers to dirt or debris of ash, of which people are formed. So could we consider the breath of life as inspiration in its purest form? Is it the force that animates, excites, and inflames that which before was uninspired? And does it awaken our senses, giving us perhaps a sense of purpose and driving us onwards, enthusing and motivating? And on the other hand, does uninspired means to be dry with no substance and dull with no shine or spark? And most importantly, can one being inspire another? Well, let's consider an example of level 2 with inspiration to do with the famous muses. I've got to click on it because sometimes it won't go down. Oops, sorry. Okay. So if in the first case, we have something like the Logos or a God bringing down inspiration into a physical being, my second level of inspiration would be a person asking for inspiration from something above. And it's curious to see in the 9 muses that we have here, that 3 of them are to do with poetry, with the choice of word. And that's not mentioning also hymns and history and comedy, which of course also use the word, the spoken word. We know that energy flows in waves, and these waves will traverse music and words and art and affect people differently according to what their vibration is, what their level of understanding and perhaps openness of unfoldment is. And it will evoke different emotions with interactions for different people. In invoking the muses, we have seen some incredible works of art and of writing. In Dante, in his Divine Comedy, La Divina Commedia, Purgatorio, in the first canto, he says, "Here rise to life again dead poetry. Let it, O holy muses, for I am yours. And here, Calliope, strike a higher key, accompanying my song with that sweet air." Dante, in this case, invoking the muses, was doing something for his own benefit. However, he wanted inspiration to put something into the words that he was creating for his own purpose. And Shakespeare did the same, invoking, "Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention." They were calling down, invoking these muses for their own inspiration and their own goals. So would there be a level 3 of inspiration? Because as Theosophists, we know that everything is evolving. In the first level, I've tried to draw a bit of a diagram here. You would have the Logos coming down and inspiring a human being. Of a second level, you would have someone asking a higher being, and the muses, of course, were still some form of divinity. And in a level 3, what would the difference be? Perhaps it would be someone asking teachings perhaps from others who have already ascended as the masters or spiritual masters, spiritual beings, but somebody asking in difference to level 2, not purely for themselves, but so that they can spread out those teachings and give that inspiration to other people for the benefit of other people, and not for their own pride and purposes of being rich and famous. Now, if we want to look at who could possibly have been someone in Theosophy to do this, we have a brilliant example of Madame Blavatsky. We see that in 1849, Madame Blavatsky visited Europe, the Americas, and India, and encountered the Masters of Wisdom. And in 1851, met Master Moria for the first time. Now, perhaps we could presume that in the beginning, her search was personal. Her personal studies then led her to these places and to meet these masters. There, something changed. At a certain point in her life, she was no longer interested in learning for herself, but took upon herself, this incredible woman, the task of service, of learning and dedicating herself to sharing those wisdom teachings with others. And this marked a massive change in her life. We see in 1875, she co-founded the Theosophical Society with Olcott and Judge, and in 77 published Isis Unveiled. In 85, she established the Blavatsky Lodge in London, which you all know. And in 88, 89, she took off in 5th gear and established the esoteric section of the TS, the Theosophical Publishing Company, the Secret Doctrine, the Key to Theosophy, and also Voice of the Silence. So her work and her service was to spread the ancient wisdoms to a level that had not been seen previously. It may perhaps be veiled, as she says, or for the few, again, as she says, but it's there if you search for it. So studying the wisdom to pass it on to others, I would say, is definitely a level 3, and it is to do with service. Furthermore, the period between 1850 to 1900, it was an incredible time, I think, all around the world for this input of inspirational teaching, and also in science, in medicine. It's something that, looking into it, I'm just amazed by how many discoveries and how many people were thinking outside of the box. So something truly important was happening. Geoffrey Farthing was a founding member of the EUST in 1981, so someone very close to my heart with his writings, of course. He was a prolific writer and teacher of the ancient wisdom, but he started off as a young boy asking questions of his pastor, and at school asking his friends what their religious beliefs were, and found that people had their ideas because the fathers and grandfathers shared those ideas, but they didn't really question them. And at this point, he walked away a bit from established religion and started looking for something else. Had a very varied life. His army life also came into it. But one of the things that struck me reading his biography was when he wrote in a letter in February 2000 to friends around the world that after 50 years of fairly intense study, I have come to the conclusion that the original outpouring of occult knowledge from the masters, to the extent that they then gave it out, was a unique world event, and it has not been appreciated properly as such. And I think that that is still very, very true. He also dedicated his life to making the teachings provided by Madame Blavatsky more accessible to everyone, spreading his inspiration and insight to whoever would call upon him to speak to them or to read his books. I have to say thank you to the Blavatsky Trust, as they have allowed us to use Geoffrey Farthing's books to create courses for the school. Of the books that he wrote, we have Theosophy, What's It All About? When We Die, Exploring the Great Beyond, After Death Consciousness and Processes, and of course, Deity, Cosmos and Man, which is the book that I chose first of all to create a course for. And that is where your journey awaits if you want to go and have a look at that. And then Foundations of Kabbalah and Theosophy from the writings of HPB, which will be coming next year in 2021. His books are open doors to an understanding of the wisdom teachings, and they led me to create what I hope will be inspiring courses to accompany others on their own personal journey of discovery in today's world. Theosophy is a path of love and light towards truth. It's of sharing teachings and of offering support as needed, for I firmly believe that we never journey alone. And as a teacher, there is no greater joy than when you see that light in someone's eyes, whether it's a student, a child, or an adult, where they finally understand the concept that you are trying to pass on, and they have that light bulb moment that they have understood. And Jeffrey Farthing has gone a long way to put Blavatsky's teachings in an easier format to understand. Let me just spend a moment on the Deity and Cosmos and Man course, which is now available on the Academy of Theosophy and Esotericism platform, free of charge. And it is a certificate course if you when you complete it. The book itself is divided into part 1 and 2, as is the course, with 14 chapters each. I've written something called Connecting the Dots, which comes along with the video, where I'm trying to add something in experience to this journey of discovery, which acts as a link between the previous chapter and the next one, perhaps assisting people in thinking outside the box when it comes to the wisdom teachings. Now, there are the self-assessment questions as well. I would have loved to have had time to have put some here for you to have a go at, because I really did enjoy doing these. And I think that people will be surprised that even though they think they've studied all of this and they know all of this, how they can have maybe a bit of fun trying to do those questions. There is always something that we have failed to notice when we are concentrated on a main task. So if we're reading to study something, other things will slip through the cracks. And as an example of that, at the next slide, I would like to ask you to look carefully at the photograph and count how many white sneakers you can see in 5 seconds. Now, only the white sneakers, if you can just concentrate on that for me. Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you've counted your sneakers, white, not black. How many of you noticed the gorilla standing in the middle? Well done, Eric. I'm sure you would. Now, this is called inattentional bias, and it's a study in psychology carried out by Arian Mack and Irvin Rock in 1992. Now, what was fascinating about this was that they asked people to concentrate on a group of adolescents or teenagers who were passing very, very quickly amongst themselves a basketball. And the task was to count how many times did that ball touch somebody's hands. Now, it was found that people were so concentrated on looking at the hands that they did not notice and did not see the gorilla walking through the crowd. Now, I couldn't play the video for you, so this is only to give you a taste, but you can go on YouTube and actually see the whole thing, how it works. Now, what I want to say is that they found that while concentrating on something, even important or salient details or objects are not visible to the eye. So taking a fresh look at the teachings with Farthing's books and courses could very well show something that might have been missed. And one of the things that as a teacher I see people don't pay a lot of attention to are the footnotes and the quotes, and especially things like pieces of poetry. Whereas I would think that if someone like Farthing or Blavatsky or the Masters has published a piece of poetry, it might be worth further contemplation. In fact, in the Mahatma letters, the Master Morya wrote to Sinnett and said, "The task is difficult, and KH, in remembrance of old times when he loved to quote poetry, asks me to close my letter with the following." And he includes the first stanza of a poem by Cristina Rossetti. He then continues, "Knowledge for the mind, like food for the body, is intended to feed and help to growth, but it requires to be well digested. And the more thoroughly and slowly the process is carried out, the better for both body and mind." Now, Madame Blavatsky and Farthing quoted the same poem as I said, but who was Cristina Rossetti? And what was the poem? Why was it so important? And why choose her? I think it's important to mention her because she was another truly remarkable woman for her era. And again, we're talking about that period between 1850 and 1900. Now, she had 3 older siblings. One, her sister, who was an author of a very important study on Dante. Her brother, Gabriel Charles Dante, was one of the foremost painters and poets of his era, who painted her as well as the Madonna in 3 or 4 of his paintings. And her brother, William Michael, a prolific art and literary critic and editor of the pre-Raphaelite movement. So she grew up in quite an influential family. Both her mother and father also were professors and teachers. She published first at the age of 11, her first poems, and then 17 nationally. And her work demonstrates a love of nature, art, and faith, with emphasis on one's individual salvation and spiritual journey. Now, if that is not the description of a theosophist, I don't know what is, to be honest. She was called the greatest Victorian woman poet due to her innovative body of work, not only of poetry and books, but non-fiction books, children's books, lyrics, art, and spiritual guidance. And she was acclaimed the successor to Elizabeth Barrett Browning on her death in 1861, and eventually herself died of breast cancer. But a remarkable, remarkable woman, and her body of work is truly worth study. Now, why look into poetry? Because in her poem, Uphill, we have something that occurs very, very often in poetry when it has to do with wisdom teachings. And that is something delivered in 2 voices, a dialogue between 2 people, usually a pupil and a seeker, and the teacher guide in a question and answer format. And the reader is invited to contemplate a personal response to those questions. In this poem, the guide refers to the seekers as my friend, which is how Christ referred to his disciples. So the poem reads, "Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Will the day's journey take the whole long day? From morn to night, my friend. But is there for the night a resting place? A roof for when the slow dark hours begin? May not the darkness hide it from my face? You cannot miss that inn. Shall I meet other wayfarers at night? Those who have gone before? Then must I knock or call when just in sight? They will not keep you standing at that door. Shall I find comfort, travel sore and weak? Of labour you shall find the sum. Will there be beds for me and all who seek? Yea, beds for all who come." Now, we can find the first 2 lines of the first stanza also present in Voice of the Silence, where it mentions steep and winds uphill, yea, to its rocky top. So if I invite you to check back on the dates when she wrote her poem in 1861, and then when The Voice of the Silence was written in 89, who influenced whom? But poetry also certainly has a great power of its own. So let's have a look at something else to do with the poetry. Noticing veiled teachings. There are three main approaches to interpreting poetry, as with all esoteric writings, and I mean each word. My teacher taught me that there are 7 major keys, and of those 7 major keys, each key has 7 lesser keys. So for each piece of information that we find, we can actually deduce 49 different teachings from it, which is mind-boggling and a wonderful study. So let's have a look just at a couple of words here. The road. She doesn't say a road or this road, but she chooses the road. And she doesn't choose path or another word, but road. This is importance of its own. But then we have 3 ways of interpreting, as I said, literally a long walk to some destination. But we know that others have gone before because they have made that road. So we are following in the footsteps of others. Metaphorically, we could say that it refers to the direction that our life is taking and the choices that we make with our own free will. Or symbolically, the spiritual way to live one's life. Always 2 voices, one guiding, encouraging the other along, and sometimes an outside reference to a higher power. Now we move on to some of the fun bits that I mentioned earlier. Now, who has watched a Disney movie as a child? Specifically, I'm talking about Bambi in this instance. We all know, or most of us know, that Bambi was orphaned when his mother escaped to draw off hunters so that he could survive, the supreme act of sacrifice to save a child. So Bambi was left abandoned in the wild forest and comes across Thumper, a rabbit, who of course has masses of sisters and brothers, but the sisters are the ones that annoy him the most. He has a present father, but we don't see Thumper's father. We only hear of his teachings that are reminds Thumper of father's teachings by his mother. So let's have a look at something from Bambi. So while Thumper is teaching Bambi about life in the forest, Mum reminds him of father's lessons regarding good behavior and moral character. Bambi starts to take his first steps, and Thumper bursts out laughing and saying, "He doesn't walk very good, does he?" And Mother immediately does her role and says, "What did your father tell you this morning?" And of course, like any child, it's, "About what? Oh, that one. If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all." And later on, we find another one about brotherliness or sisterliness, where Thumper remarks to Bambi, "My sisters have been bothering me all day and I'm supposed to look after them." And his mum pops up with, "What did your father tell you?" And again, he replies, "A family that plays together stays together." Definitely teachings that come across in our cartoons when we're very young. If we then want to unpack the whole journey of growing up and finding help within the forest, it gives some moments for thought. A film that I like, because I like disaster movies, was 2012. Now, for people that aren't familiar with this movie, the Earth has had enough and she wants to change her polar axis, which means the waters are shifting, everyone's going to be flooded, and people start building arks somewhere in the Himalayas. Way up high in a monastery is the Lama Rinpoche with one of his students, and his students is most upset by all of these goings on and says, oh, you know, it's the end of the world. We're going to die. We're going to die. What will happen to us? And my brother is building ships to escape. And what's going to happen? And while he's carrying on this fashion, Rinpoche starts pouring out the tea until the student says, stop, it's full. And his teacher remarks, as the tea flows out of the bowl onto the table and down to the floor, that while the cup no longer holds the tea does not stop existing. It continues in a different form. And this calms the student. But then the teacher makes another comment. And he says, you are like this cup. I love his face here. You are full of opinions and speculations. To see the light of wisdom, you first must empty your cup to calm our mind. And these are teachings we're very familiar with, to keep an open mind, to maintain an unveiled perception of the truth, and to place confidence in your teacher. He does in the end, when he finishes this sentence, throw him the keys to the car and say, be careful because there's a problem with the clutch. Another film that comes across with this same teaching is Avatar. Here, people from Earth have destroyed the planet, moved to another planet to mine minerals, totally disregarding the people who live there in peace and harmony with the planet. And one of the soldiers decides to fight on the side of the natives there, of the residents there. And as Jake Sully speaks to the shaman Moat, he's saying, oh, but, you know, I know all about war and we have to go and attack and we have to fight, we have to prepare. And she's trying to tell him that there, the one and the many are the same thing, that as they belong to the planet, so does the planet belong to them, that they are in connection with the animals and the plants and they live and exist as one. And that for him to understand that, he has to listen. And she said, I can't get through to you, and uses the very same words of that Zen saying that it is hard to fill a cup that is already full. So this would be interpreted as meaning, be ready to receive teachings, not only to give them, and to be open to the views of others and respect their right to have them. For we are the many in the one, and nature is in harmony. And this is something that we all know. Going back to the 70s, where I was around 15 at this time, 14, 15, Pink Floyd came out, which was, I think, is the best album of all time, Dark Side of the Moon, and with the song Eclipse, where they say, all that you touch, all that you see, all that you taste, and all that you feel, and all that is now, all that is gone, and all that's to come. Everything under the sun is in tune, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. Now, everything under the sun is all things under the light, and they are all in tune, they are all in harmony. However, the sun, that light, that truth, is eclipsed, which means it's veiled for a short time by the moon. And we know the moon to be Maya, to be illusion, to be something that is astral, something that is not real. So if we were to unveil that moon to see the sun, we would have that truth, and we would then also be in harmony with the teachings and with nature and with everything else, at least in my opinion. Another song that greatly affected me, which I think is wonderful and very moving, is What a Wonderful World, sung by Louis Armstrong. The power that is in music truly is overwhelming. And he starts by saying he sees trees of green and sees them bloom, and he thinks to himself, what a wonderful world, and the colors of the rainbows and the faces of the people going by shaking hands, which are all gestures of love, and they're saying, I love you. But what I find moving is when he says, I hear babies cry and I watch them grow, and they will learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And this is the hope that we place in the younger generations. And as a teacher and anyone that has lectured this year on any of the platforms for Theosophy, for any TS around the world, they have tried to give teachings to people to help them move on. And when somebody who is older gives the teachings that they have learnt, the wisdom that they have arrived at in the course of their many years, to someone perhaps in their 20s and 30s, to receive that information, that teaching at 20 or 30 means they're 30 years ahead of what we are, because they are starting where we are finishing. And this is an incredible gift to give to people. That gift of sharing the teaching and the wisdom truly is inspiring and incredible. However, people will say, Juliet, we can't be happy all the time. And in fact, even John Lennon says life gets in the way of being happy, and it's hard to stay positive. And here we move on to what I think is one of my favorite books that I want to be cremated with me when I go, if I can say that. And that is Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. Now, Tolkien was a young man who went to university, and he met his friends and ended up going and fighting in the Somme and seeing the most horrific scenes and whatever. And what got him through all of that was the sense of fellowship that he had with his friends. And the films are lovely, but if you read the books, they are full of poetry and full of inspiring conversations. And one is by Frodo Baggins, who is the Hobbit. He's purely of pure heart and pure mind, the only one that could be given the task of this ring of power that nobody else could carry, because they would have been overwhelmed with the power of wanting to take charge and be in control. And he said, how do you pick up the threads of an old life? How do you go on when in your heart you begin to understand there is no going back? There are some things that time cannot mend, some hurts that go too deep, that have taken hold. And I think this rings especially true this year with the COVID crisis around the world, where many people are not going to come out of this and return to life the way it was before COVID. And this is someone who was light-hearted, but burdened by the weight of that ring and the evil of the ring, and has his moment, what we call the dark night of St. John, where he's put to the test, and where his friend then turns around and says, no, there is good in the world. In fact, we see Sam, who comes out and says, well, not in the sense that it's Haldir, but the world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places, but still there is much that is fair. And though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it grows perhaps the greater. Because we all know that when we have faced illness, when we have faced suffering, when we have faced hardship, yeah, it's difficult to come through it, but we are stronger because of it. And the light has more importance and is brighter after the darkness. Remember, this man fought at the Battle of the Somme, where they were literally walking over the faces of men, which were also in hell, in Dante. You could see the faces just sunken into the water and the mud. They died where they fell in the mud. And this is not in the film, but in the book, he says, for a while they stood there, like men on the edge of a sleep where nightmare lurks, holding it off, though they know that they can only come to morning through the shadows. And that is a phrase that I have carried with me sometimes in dark times, personal dark times, when I've said, Juliet, you've only got to go one more hour, make it through the night, one more hour and the morning will come. And in the light of day, once dawn comes, I don't know why, but things don't seem to be as bad. We have to get through that night, get through that bad time. Another important piece of teaching was that not all those who wander are lost. Sometimes people need a time out. They've had so many hardships to face that they are just beaten. They are just in a daze, and they are not wandering because they're lost. They're wandering in that state of confusion, going around the roundabout, trying to decide which exit to take. So I think that there is a level 4 of inspiration, which is when your inner knowledge, born from efforts and suffering, are dedicated to inspiring others around you, and you then become living inspiration, which I think is what also Madame Blavatsky became. She was literally living inspiration. There are those people that by sitting at the feet of the masters, you are inspired just by their presence, because they live that inspiration. Now, all of the pieces that I've mentioned during my talk refer back in some way to the golden stairs, which is my inspiration. Talking of a clean life and a pure heart, we have the hobbits carrying forward like children. An open mind and an eager intellect. If we don't have an open mind and we are laden down by bias, we can't learn anything. And if we don't have an eager intellect that drives us forward, pushing us to learn, to ask questions, to question ourselves, to weigh up the pros and cons, to have an intelligent, peaceful debate with other people, how can we test what we feel to be true? What are our hypotheses if we do not confront these with somebody else? And to do that, we need an unveiled spiritual perception and a brotherliness for all. We need a readiness to give and also to receive advice and instruction, because it is a two-way path. And this is a teacher. Anyone that teaches knows this, that you learn more from your students than perhaps you are in teaching. It's the questions they ask you that make you go deeper into the argument that you are teaching. A loyal sense of duty to the teacher and a willing obedience to the behests of truth, once we have placed our confidence in and believed that teacher to be in possession of it. The hard bits, a courageous endurance of personal injustice, and still a brave declaration of principles. A valiant defense of those who are unjustly attacked. And these three come from that which is within ourselves, that inner inspiration that we have that give us that strength to march on. A constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection which the secret science depicts. And these are the golden stairs up the steps of which the learner may climb to the temple of divine wisdom. Now, taking those back to Bambi and to the music and to the films and to the teachings and to poetry, they unpack themselves in a different way. And I hope that it might have brought you this evening a different vision of where I'm coming from. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening. And as Theosophists, we inspire to inspire. Thank you very much.